Carney met earlier today with the UAE's president. The CBC's Ashley Burke is traveling with the PM and brings us more on the country's latest investment deal.
The purpose of the FIPA is to create an environment where investors from one country can take confident steps in investing in another, in projects and infrastructure projects, for example, and understand that their investment will be treated from an international standard fairly and objectively.
Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith could be close to a deal on the future of Alberta's energy sector. And the UAE announced it plans on investing $70 billion into Canada's economy.
Now, this is all part of the Prime Minister's promise to double non-U.S. exports over the next decade because of Donald Trump's trade war.
On the surface, to the uninitiated, Canada and the UAE can appear as different as snow and sand. Yet we're deeply, deeply aligned.
Particular trip is that Canada does not have a wealth of foreign investment protection agreements or treaties, international trade treaties with the Gulf states. And so this signals an openness from Canada to engage in these negotiations, to encourage bilateral investment between both regions in a manner that hasn't been exercised before.
But working with the Crown Prince was amazing because he mentioned Sudan yesterday. And he said, sir, you're talking about a lot of wars, but there's a place on earth called Sudan. And it's horrible what's happening.
It's fine that we have the issue with the Americans, but you know, at the end of the day, it's about us. And what it says to Canadians is that there's a bigger world out there than just the United States. And if we are going to diversify our trade, if we're going to prosper, we have to go out there and actually drum up some business.
Essentially what we have is the UAE funneling weapons that are exported to the UAE, but then are being diverted illicitly against Canada's export laws to the RSF, and then denying that is happening. But the evidence is insurmountable, and yet Canada continues to not even address this issue publicly.
During the sit-down, which Canadian media did not have access to, the pair also discussed a range of regional security issues in the Middle East and Africa. And while the PMO wouldn't confirm it, the crisis in Sudan was expected to be raised.
Prime Minister Carney can send the simple message that we refuse to build our economy on the backs of emaciated corpses and mass graves. That cannot be the cost of doing business.
Carney didn't hold a press conference while in the UAE, but stopped briefly and answered two questions from Canadian media about if he brought up Sudan with the UAE's president. The Gulf country is facing allegations it's supporting a paramilitary force accused of atrocities in Sudan, a claim it denies.
We did discuss the situation in Sudan. We did discuss the importance of the Quad process.
Mark Carney just pulled off something no Canadian PM has done in decades. Secured massive UAE backing while Trump threatens our economy with tariffs and annexation talk. Thanks for watching Canada Connect, and hit that subscribe button because this story changes everything about Canada's future. The UAE royals rolled out red carpet treatment normally reserved for global superpowers. Behind closed doors, the message was clear. We'll bankroll your projects and help build a Canada that Trump can't control. This isn't routine diplomacy, it's economic realignment that could redefine Canada's power on the world stage. The $50 billion reality, what actually happened. Let me break down exactly what Carney accomplished in Abu Dhabi. First, he signed the Foreign Investment Protection Agreement after more than 8 years of negotiations. This isn't some symbolic handshake. It's legal framework that protects billions in UAE investments flowing into Canadian infrastructure. The UAE's sovereign wealth funds control trillions globally, and they're now committed to Canadian projects. We're talking about Mubadala, MGX, ADQ, and ADIC. These are the financial powerhouses that reshape entire economies. Carney met with all of them during his visit. But here's the bigger move. Carney launched talks for a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. Former Quebec Premier Jean Charest, who co-chairs the Canada-UAE Business Council, confirmed this is a prelude to a trade agreement. He told reporters that large UAE investors already have stakes in major Canadian infrastructure, and the UAE wants to position itself as the Gulf's financial hub with Canada as its North American partner. The specific focus areas tell the real story. AI collaboration, where the UAE is becoming a global leader, using cheap energy to power massive data centers. Energy corridors, including that potential pipeline to northern BC coast that would transform Canada's export capacity. Data center investments that could make Canada a tech powerhouse. Here's what makes this different from past Canadian trade missions. The UAE sees genuine opportunity in Canada's resource economy and tech strengths. They're not doing us favors. They're making strategic bets. As one senior government official told reporters, both nations share resource economies and AI ambitions. The timeline matters too. Just 1 month before Carney's visit, Canada and UAE signed an agreement boosting AI and data center collaboration. Air Canada and Emirates extended their code share agreement to 2032, while Carney's plane was literally en route to Abu Dhabi. This coordination shows months of preparation. Jean Charest's comments reveal the scale. He said, UAE positioning as the Gulf Financial Center means we have a lot in common because we're each in our own way a hub to the rest of the world. That's not trade talk, that's alliance building. The Investment Protection Agreement creates confidence for UAE money flowing into Canadian projects. The comprehensive partnership would speed commerce, help with intellectual property issues, and assist labor mobility between countries. These aren't abstract policy changes. They are the foundation for massive infrastructure projects. Consider the northern BC pipeline corridor Carney's been promoting. This would require tens of billions in financing and a stable partner willing to back generational infrastructure. UAE sovereign funds specialize in exactly these long-term, high-impact projects. If they commit serious money, it transforms Canada's energy export capacity and reduces dependence on U.S. ports. The UAE's approach is strategic, not charitable. They understand geopolitics better than almost anyone. Supporting a stable, resource-rich Canada strengthened by UAE capital creates a counterweight to U.S. unpredictability. When Trump threatens tariffs or makes annexation jokes, Canada backed by UAE wealth becomes much harder to pressure. This represents the biggest foreign investment commitment to Canadian infrastructure in years. The UAE doesn't move slowly on opportunities they believe in. When their sovereign funds see potential, they deploy capital decisively. Carney gave them projects worth backing, and they responded exactly as insiders predicted. The strategic shift. Why this matters for Canada. U.S. relations. The timing of this UAE deal isn't coincidental. It's strategic. While Trump makes unpredictable threats about annexing Canada and imposing crushing tariffs, Carney is building economic alternatives that make those threats less effective. Think about what Trump's been saying lately. Jokes about making Canada the 51st state, threats of 25% tariffs, demands that Canada increase defense spending or face consequences. This isn't normal diplomatic pressure, it's economic bullying designed to force Canadian compliance. The UAE deal creates what experts call economic diversification away from U.S. dependence. Right now, roughly 75% of Canadian exports go to the United States. That makes us incredibly vulnerable to Trump's mood swings and trade tantrums. But when UAE sovereign wealth funds start bankrolling major Canadian infrastructure, that changes our entire negotiating position. Let's talk specifics about that northern BC pipeline corridor. Currently, most Canadian energy exports flow through U.S. ports and infrastructure. We are essentially paying rent to our neighbor for access to global markets. A UAE-financed pipeline to BC's northern coast would bypass U.S. infrastructure entirely. That's not just economic independence. That's strategic autonomy. The job creation numbers matter too. Major infrastructure projects create thousands of direct construction jobs and thousands more in supporting industries. When those paychecks come from UAE-backed projects instead of US-dependent trade, Canadian workers become less vulnerable to Trump's economic pressure campaigns. Here's what really worries Washington. Canada is following the same diversification pattern we've seen with other U.S. allies. The Malaysia trade deal Carney signed earlier this year, the expanded partnerships with European nations, the strengthened ties with Pacific partners. Each deal reduces America's economic leverage over Canadian decision-making. UAE leadership understands this dynamic perfectly. They've watched Trump's unpredictable behavior toward traditional allies. They've seen how he uses economic pressure to demand political compliance. Supporting Canada's infrastructure independence isn't just good business, it's strategic positioning against U.S. volatility. The Energy Corridor project specifically threatens U.S. interests. American ports, pipelines, and refineries currently profit from processing Canadian resources. When Canada can export directly through BC to Asian markets, those profits disappear. That's billions in lost revenue for U.S. infrastructure companies. But this shift creates leverage Canada hasn't had in decades. When Trump threatens tariffs, Canada can point to alternative markets and financing sources. When he demands policy changes, Canada can afford to say no because our economy isn't entirely dependent on U.S. goodwill. The UAE sees this opportunity clearly. A stronger, more independent Canada becomes a valuable partner in a multipolar world. They're not just investing in Canadian projects, they're investing in a geopolitical counterweight to American dominance in North America. This represents a fundamental shift from begging the U.S. for predictable trade relationships to building alternatives that make U.S. threats less scary. Instead of hoping Trump will be reasonable, Canada is creating economic structures that work regardless of who's in the White House. The balanced view, challenges, and criticisms. However, this UAE partnership comes with serious ethical concerns that can't be ignored. The timing is particularly awkward because the UAE faces mounting accusations of fueling genocide in Sudan's brutal civil war. Since April 2023, Sudan has been torn apart by fighting between the army and the Rapid Support Forces, a militia that succeeded the Janjaweed group responsible for the first Darfur genocide. The RSF has posted horrific social media videos showing mass killings and ethnic violence. Yale's Humanitarian Research Lab identified satellite images showing pools of blood at multiple massacre sites. Multiple sources, including a UN panel of experts, have found credible reports that the UAE is arming the RSF despite a UN arms embargo. Rights groups cite the number of flights between UAE and Sudan, documented weapons with UAE shipping labels, and continued gold exports from Sudan to UAE as evidence. In January, the Biden administration called the situation in Sudan a genocide and sanctioned UAE companies accused of providing arms to the militants. Just last week, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned that a specific country, widely interpreted as the UAE, needs to stop supporting the RSF. Former Canadian ambassador to Sudan, Nicholas Coughlin, has been particularly critical of Canada's approach. He told reporters he's surprised to see the Carney government refuse to single out the UAE in public statements. Coughlin argued Canada should publicly call on the UAE to respect the UN arms embargo, saying, "There seems to be an excessive pussyfooting around trying not to offend anybody." The UAE embassy in Canada categorically denies providing support to either warring party, stating they condemn violence by the RSF and follow global standards to track gold shipments. They argue the UN report makes clear that there is no substantiated evidence that the UAE has provided any support to RSF. But Coughlin warns that Canada risks damaging its reputation for defending international law if it doesn't pressure the UAE on Sudan. Those who are watching Sudan will be watching the Prime Minister's visit carefully, he said. There's also the restricted media access during Carney's visit. Unlike most diplomatic meetings, the UAE barred media from bilateral discussions that other countries typically make open to visiting press. This unusual secrecy raises questions about what commitments Canada might be making behind closed doors. Expert Janice Stein from the University of Toronto acknowledges the UAE's Sudan involvement, but notes they've also made recent peace moves that haven't been matched by the other side. The Rapid Support Forces have accepted a ceasefire that the Trump administration put forward, and the UAE was instrumental in that, she said. The question becomes whether the economic benefits of UAE partnership outweigh the reputational risks of closer ties with a country accused of fueling genocide. It's a classic foreign policy dilemma: pure principles versus strategic interests. Conclusion: the bottom line. This UAE deal represents Canada's biggest strategic shift in decades, from begging the U.S. for predictable trade to building partnerships that make Trump's threats irrelevant. When UAE wealth becomes the financial engine behind Canada's national projects, we get an economic shield that tariffs can't penetrate. Drop your thoughts in the comments about whether this realignment is worth the diplomatic trade-offs.